Hi, this is Donald James from Pleasanton, California, and it's truly an honor to present to you at this year's campus party. I had the pleasure of attending campus party events in Berlin and Mexico City, and like many others, I look forward to being together with you again in person. I'm grateful to Mr. Paco Recagales and Mr. Juan Negrillo for inviting me, and to my friend Giacomo and his colleagues for making this digital campus party possible. And I'm especially happy to all the people out there for your generous donations that will support a wonderful organization, Doctors Without Borders. I appreciate your generosity. So in thinking about the theme of rebooting the world, rebooting the earth for this year's event, I've been drawn to a question about rebooting education, which is my professional background. And I've been curious about this question about, can we really change education for good? Now, I've had the privilege of working for NASA, mostly in education. So, sorry. So the topic is near and dear to my heart. I confess that I am not a scholar of education, nor am I a licensed teacher, so please forgive me if I sound like either. So let's take a quick look at what happened. So what we find is that, we're want to think about in education how the pandemic has affected our world. And it's really affected it globally, although it's affected different people differently. And I would like to provoke some thinking today about education in light of the pandemic, particularly on matters of social justice issues, and think about the possibilities. And looking at, so how do we plan for the future when we're not really sure what it is? Personally, I have many more questions than I have answers. In fact, I know I don't have answers. I have ideas and hypotheses and suggestions, and perhaps you do as well. The campus party community, especially the campuseros and all the amazing speakers and wonderful sponsors, is well known for accepting big challenges. So I hope many of you will focus your genius on education. In fact, physicist Calvin Mackey, with whom I've had the pleasure of meeting, a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta and Georgia Tech, once said, "Do not hide your genius." And so I invite all of you to please don't hide your genius when it comes to looking at the problems that we're facing. So after a brief look at what happened and considering where we go from here, I'd like to conclude with my favorite question that I learned from Rona Ramon. I had the privilege of meeting Mrs. Ramon. As you know, she was the widow of the first Israeli astronaut, Ilan Ramon. And Rona invited us not just to ask why we might do something, but she asked for what. And the implication is that we must have a reason that, as I would put it, to understand and advance the human condition. So I will speak a lot in generalities here, and with the obvious bias of my own culture and experience as a middle class, Black, educated male citizen of the United States. We understand that a typical model for educating students typically has a teacher in front of a group of students who are approximately the same age. And this model has been the same in general for over 100 years. In fact, if you were to dig up a teacher from about 100 years ago and place her, and many times it was a woman, and put her in a classroom today, she might not be too shocked by what she sees. For sure, the technology has changed, but the setup is very similar. And we understand that the structure typically is that there's a beginning, your student starts in pre-K or kindergarten, and then there's these various endings, or we call advancements or graduations, and you go through this process and then you go to work. Of course, I'm oversimplifying the model, but I think you get the point for the illustration purposes. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. And the pandemic unless you've been in a deep coma for the past 6 months and you know the entire planet experienced this event. And sometimes I say this is analogous to the asteroid that hit the Earth. Everyone is well aware that now the United States sadly stands alone at the top of this crisis. And you can see the data in the bottom from yesterday from the New York Times. So this impact has had a tremendous impact on education. And suddenly schools were immediately going into distance learning mode. Now, distance learning has been around for a while. This is nothing new. And so what I'm speaking of is the fact that most schools, all schools, had to figure out a way to deliver learning and education. Um, but my colleagues at NASA, particularly my colleague, Dr. Shelley Canwright, was a pioneer in a lot of multimedia and distance learning tools for NASA. So it's nothing new, but now everybody has really had to jump into this. But what we've discovered is that in the United States, particularly, the capabilities of the schools and the universities was quite uneven. Some were very well prepared and some were not prepared. And of course, it wasn't just the students and teachers that were impacted. It was very frustrating for parents, like the famous mother in Israel whose video went viral in a rant about her challenges at home. And you can see her quote here that, well, if we don't die of coronavirus, we're going to die of distance learning. So that prompted me to explore a little bit more about the different terms and distinctions that have been around for a while, but now we're all becoming much more familiar with them. We're learning about concepts of physical distancing and flattening the curve, and people are Zooming and Microsoft Teams. And exactly, what is distance learning, or is it online learning, or is it remote learning? And so my own review of the literature tells me that the concepts are in fact different. So we must become a bit more familiar with them in order to make sense of what is happening and what should happen. You can see on the chart that there's different tools. So in a more synchronous environment, that is where you're connected in real time like we are, that there's different tools. You can see we Zoom, we use Canvas in education systems, Blackboard, and there's others. And then for more asynchronous learning, where your communication and connection with the source of the information is not real time, books. Books are the original distance learning tool. If you think about it, television was used. We have YouTube and Khan Academy, things of that nature. I'm appreciative of Professor Scott Newstock at Rhodes University in Tennessee, who suggested that remote learning is perhaps best for training purposes, but he is not so sure it enables great education. And I tend to agree with him. Technology is great at providing instant information and global communication, but I don't think it means necessarily that learning will improve or for sure will become more equitable. And to make a point that the tools that we use should not be confused with instructional design. That is something done by trained educators and curriculum development people. So one model that has begun to emerge that you can imagine is a student-centric model. And you can see here a student who's has access to teachers and peers, does self-learning, and also has access to experts from around the world. You see that the distance doesn't particularly matter because they can connect with a teacher in Japan or an expert in Israel or wherever they're connecting to. And the beauty, of course, is that the location and information is really irrelevant. However, to think about advanced work in education, it may be difficult to do field work, and even in a COVID world, I suppose it's possible to do field work with other humans, but there would be challenges, and you can imagine what some of these challenges are. So what I've been thinking about is, and I want to think a friend of mine and colleague, Eric Niles at the Athenian School near where I live, about a different model for education, one that borrows on some traditional models. I call it challenge-centric. Now, in this illustration, a problem or a project-based model, or I call challenge-centric, it's a strategy that is actually well understood in education circles. I'm using the term challenge-centric to show a way of looking at the existential threats that we're facing today. And as you can see in the diagram on the right, advance public health, to advance the cause of public health. Right now, we're grappling with the COVID problem, and then reversing global warming. These are potentially existential threats to all of humanity. And so we have other challenges as well, and I know other people have spoken at this conference about these issues, and it's well worth studying many of the things they talked about. And what you see around the different challenges are what I would call the toolkits. The toolkits are where the students must deeply engage and learn to use to apply to the different challenges. And I would call your attention to a couple of them, particularly justice and equity, where those are really inseparable in terms of addressing these challenges from the traditional disciplines that you would find in the humanities or the sciences or the math as well. And so it's the student themselves become, their aspiration is really in the mastery and the expertise of many of these areas as they look to address problems. And, you know, it's okay to have a particular discipline expertise, but I'm making an argument that it's equally as important to dive deeply into these other areas so that you don't have the silos. So by breaking down the silos of the traditional educational model, where you become a math expert of some sort, or a history expert, or a social justice expert, the student really must engage all of these domains to bear on the challenges. Moving towards a specialty at the expense of other disciplines, I believe is part of the problem. We become siloed. So in some cases, we think that, you know, the problem for certain challenges is for other people and that they have to address it. The chemist, for example, may look at the global warming issue through the lens of chemistry, and the social justice expert may propose policies that perhaps are inconsistent with the historical record or the sciences. The technologist or engineer might ask, so what problem do we need to solve here? Just give me the requirements and I'll go build something. And then we do all of this, and then we wonder why the poor people don't benefit from the solutions, or marginalized people don't benefit. We discover that they really weren't at the table in the first place to look at these things. So the aspiration of the student is to move towards mastery and expertise, not in one discipline, but in several, in a very connected, related, and integrated way. And it really suggests that this is a lifelong process with the possibility that current and future challenges can also be addressed with this way of thinking. So for the student, the notion of an end to her education, as in the traditional model, is really significantly diminished. Now, I want to turn my attention to this notion of STEM, because as someone who's been a leader in pushing the whole STEM idea, I'm here to say publicly that I think I may have been wrong about that. And I really started to think this way when a high school student asked me, what is the best college to go to where I can major in STEM? And I knew that we had overdone the whole STEM thing because, well, we managed to turn STEM into a thing. Now, yes, in the United States, you know, we were concerned about not having enough scientists and engineers and mathematicians. And this is partly why we have so many smart people from other countries who come to the US to work. Our companies badly needed the talent, and somehow they couldn't figure out to find them or to cultivate them here in the United States. So we at NASA wanted to do our part by using the aeronautics, science, and space programs to inspire more students, especially in the United States, to pursue STEM disciplines. So NASA and the country had a workforce to meet the growing demand and technical needs that NASA needs as well as the nation needs. So I don't know that the question is whether or not we were successful about STEM. My own conclusion is that it's mixed. And I'm here to tell you that I'm still trying, even though I have my reservations about some of the core strategies and the communications methods that we used. In fact, I hope you'll tune in to listen to my colleagues, John Hines and Dr. Marsha Maxwell later, to learn more details about some of the efforts that I'm working with them on, particularly with John's Hines Family Foundation, to really address and tackle some of the challenges of reaching underserved populations and underrepresented students. But I'm here to tell you that I do have questions and I do have doubts, and I hope you do as well. And I hope you will join me to grapple with the best way forward. You see, I don't think that after COVID is over, and God willing, it will be over, I don't think that with respect to education, we should go back to sort of the way it was. I think the toothpaste is really out of the tube now. And I suggest we need to create a way of thinking about education and what it means to know, to learn, and what it means to be educated. What I know for sure is that the big challenges we face, some like global warming and public health, may in fact force us to focus universally on these challenges. So when the asteroid is headed to the Earth, we must put all of our best minds to the task while asking ourselves, for what? So I really appreciate this chance to share some of these thoughts with you. I put up a couple of URLs that I really would invite you to explore more. I spent 35 years at NASA, and I'm very proud of many of the things we did there. At nasa.gov, you have access to a lot of information, things that you know that are happening currently as the agency is going back to the moon with the Artemis program. We know that Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo. We are also doing really cool things like sending a helicopter to fly around Mars, which is the first time that's ever happened on another celestial body. And this young lady in the picture, Vanessa Rupani, a student in Alabama, won the contest to name the helicopter. It's called Ingenuity. And so she participated, and forever in the history books, she will be associated with the first helicopter to fly on another planet. I'm also grateful for the ability to work with an amazing company called The Collaborative out of Boston, founded by two very smart people out of MIT. Collaborative is also working on many of the solutions of big challenges, specifically with cities and urban planning and transportation, as well as being a leader in education and communications. And I'm so proud to support my friend and fellow NASA retiree, John Hines, and his Hines Family Foundation, on which I have the privilege of serving. And please check out his presentation and Dr. Maxwell's as way. And please consider engaging with us as we support underserved students to design and build, as John likes to say, real space stuff. And please feel free to contact me as well. You see my website there, as well as my email. I welcome your ideas and thoughts or questions, and especially your ideas about the future of education. We cannot return to the way it was. We must go forward to the way it needs to be. And so I look forward to any questions you might have, and I look forward to hearing from you. Okay, I think we have a question. Could we be looking into a new way of learning for people who can't go to a traditional school or academy? How could that help to gain expertise for those people? Well, I think that's the challenge, that we're going to have to explore that. What I am convinced is that you can't just apply technology and assume that you're going to have good learning and equitable learning. It does require good instructional design and good teaching. And I think we're getting better at being able to do this when we're physically separated. But I'm old school. I think that I like to be there in person. You see, if I was talking to you at a campus party event in person, after the speech is over, I would engage with 3 or 4 people and I would learn some things from you. We would exchange business cards and do all kinds of things that I may not have the opportunity to do because we're far away. So we need to continue to explore this because we might be doing this again. So I appreciate the question. And also, I meant to say earlier that, we've had a tradition of homeschooling, which in a way is a different model for learning where parents and guardians are teaching their children in their very own home, and they're using lots of tools like Khan Academy and other tools to bring content in. Um, but however, there's pros and cons to that when they're not around their peers, which is also part of the learning process. Well, thank you for the question. All right, I see that there's no more questions. Thank you very much to my colleagues and friends out there, and I do look forward to when we can get together again in person.